The autumn sun cast long shadows across the Mitchell family's backyard in suburban Portland, Oregon. 8-year-old Tommy Mitchell crouched behind the old oak tree, his small frame trembling with excitement as he listened to his 12-year-old twin siblings, Alex and Emma, counting down from 20. 18, now 17, 16. Emma's voice carried across the yard, muffled by the hands covering her eyes as she leaned against the back porch. Sarah Mitchell watched from the kitchen window, a tired smile crossing her face as she observed her children's afternoon ritual. At 34, she carried the weight of single motherhood with quiet determination, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun after another long day at the insurance office. The divorce had been finalized 8 months ago, and these moments of pure childhood joy were becoming increasingly precious. Tommy shifted his weight, dead leaves crunching beneath his sneakers. He wore his favorite red hoodie, the one Sarah had bought him for his birthday last month, and his gap-toothed grin was barely contained as he plotted his next hiding spot. 10, 9, 8. Alex joined in, his voice deeper than his twin sister's, recently cracked from the onset of puberty. The boy's eyes darted toward the garden shed at the far end of their property. It was the perfect hiding spot, dark, cluttered with old lawn equipment, and tucked behind Sarah's withering vegetable garden. Tommy had hidden there countless times before, but today felt different. Today he was determined to win. 5, 4, 3. Tommy bolted from behind the oak tree, his red hoodie a flash of color against the brown fence line. His heart pounded with the thrill of the chase as he sprinted toward the shed, unaware that someone was watching from the house next door. Marcus Webb stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, observing the Mitchell children with intense focus. At 42, Marcus was a pillar of the community, a respected contractor who had lived next door to the Mitchells for over 5 years. He had inserted himself into their lives gradually, especially after David Mitchell moved out. Sarah appreciated having a reliable male figure nearby, someone Tommy could look up to, but Marcus's interest in the family ran much deeper than neighborly concern. 2, 1, ready or not, here we come, Emma shouted. The twins began their search, checking behind trees under the porch steps and around the corner of the house. Sarah returned to washing dishes, the sound of running water masking the children's distant calls of, "Tommy, come out, wherever you are." Minutes passed, then an hour. Alex appeared at the back door, his face flushed from running around the yard. "Mom, we can't find Tommy anywhere. We've looked everywhere twice." Sarah dried her hands on a kitchen towel, a flicker of concern crossing her features. "Did you check the shed?" "First place we looked," Emma said, appearing beside her brother. "It's locked, and we couldn't see him through the window." The concern deepened into something colder. Tommy never stayed hidden this long. He was too eager for praise, too excited about winning to remain silent for over an hour. Sarah stepped onto the back porch, her voice carrying across the yard with maternal authority. "Tommy, game's over, honey. Come inside." Silence. The October air seemed to grow thinner as Sarah walked across the yard, checking every hiding spot herself. Behind the oak tree, under the porch, around the side of the house, in the garden shed. Unlocked, despite what the twins had said, but empty except for rusted tools and spider webs. "Tommy!" she called again, her voice now edged with panic. Marcus Webb appeared at the fence line, his expression perfectly crafted with concern. "Everything okay, Sarah?" I heard shouting. "We can't find Tommy," she said, her voice beginning to shake. "He was playing hide and seek, but now—" "I'm sure he's just found a really good hiding spot," Marcus said, climbing over the low fence with practiced ease. "You know how kids are, let me help look." For the next 2 hours they searched. Marcus organized the effort with calm efficiency, suggesting they check the neighbors' yards, the small woods behind the subdivision, even the storm drains along the street. Other neighbors joined the search as word spread. Mrs. Henderson from across the street, the Johnsons from 2 doors down, even some of Tommy's classmates and their parents. But as darkness fell and the temperature dropped, the horrible truth began to settle in Sarah's chest like ice. Tommy was gone. By 9 p.m., Sarah had called the police. By 10 p.m., Officer Janet Rodriguez was taking detailed statements in the Mitchell living room, while other officers combed the neighborhood with flashlights. "When did you last see Tommy?" Officer Rodriguez asked, her notepad balanced on her knee. "Around 3:30, Sarah whispered, her hands shaking around a cup of cold coffee. "He was hiding behind the oak tree in our backyard." Marcus sat nearby, having stayed to provide support. His presence was comforting to Sarah, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the world. Children didn't just vanish from their own backyards in broad daylight. "We'll have search teams out at first light," Officer Rodriguez assured her, "and we're issuing an Amber Alert tonight." As the police finally left near midnight, Marcus helped Sarah tuck Alex and Emma into bed. Both children were crying, asking questions Sarah couldn't answer. "He's going to come home." "Right, Mum?" Emma whispered. Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair, fighting back her own tears. "We're going to find him, sweetheart, I promise." But as she turned off the bedroom light, Sarah caught a glimpse of Marcus's face in the hallway mirror. For just a moment, his carefully constructed mask of concern slipped, revealing something else underneath, something that made her blood run cold. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the darkness, Tommy Mitchell began the first night of what would become the longest 3 days of his young life. Dawn broke grey and cold over Portland, painting the Mitchell house in muted tones that matched Sarah's hollow exhaustion. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, and now sat at her kitchen table surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled tissues. The Amber Alert had been broadcast throughout the night, Tommy's school photo flashing across television screens and smartphone notifications across Oregon and neighboring states. Detective Mike Sullivan arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, his weathered face carrying decades of experience with cases like this. At 55, he'd seen enough missing children cases to know that the first 48 hours were critical. He found Sarah staring blankly at Tommy's empty cereal bowl, still sitting on the counter from yesterday morning. "Mrs. Mitchell, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask some detailed questions," Detective Sullivan said, settling into the chair across from her. His voice was gentle but professional. "Sometimes the smallest detail can make the difference." Sarah nodded, forcing herself to focus. "Anything. I'll tell you anything. Tell me about Tommy's routine, his friends, his habits, anywhere he might go if he was scared or upset." "He's not the type to wander off," Sarah said firmly. "Tommy is responsible for his age. He knows our rules about staying in the yard." She caught herself switching to past tense and felt sick. Detective Sullivan made notes. "What about his father? Any custody disputes?" "David lives in Seattle now. I called him last night. He hasn't seen Tommy since his weekend visit 3 weeks ago. They're checking his alibi, but—" Sarah shook her head. "David has his problems, but he wouldn't take Tommy like this." Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see the organized chaos of the search effort. Volunteers from the community were gathering in small groups, coordinating with police officers and K-9 units. Local news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like mechanical flowers seeking sun. Marcus Webb moved among the volunteers with quiet efficiency, distributing coffee and coordinating search grids. To everyone watching, he was the model neighbor, concerned, helpful, taking charge when the family was too distraught to function. "Mr. Webb has been incredibly helpful," Detective Sullivan observed, following Sarah's gaze. "How well do you know him?" "Marcus? He's been our neighbor for 5 years. He helped me with repairs after the divorce, always keeps an eye on the kids when I'm running errands. Tommy adores him, calls him Uncle Marcus." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I don't know what I would have done without his support these past months." Detective Sullivan nodded, but made a note to conduct a thorough background check on Marcus Webb anyway. In cases like this, the perpetrator was often someone close to the family. At that moment, Alex and Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in their pajamas, eyes red from crying. They had aged years overnight, their childhood innocence shattered by Tommy's disappearance. "Mum, can we help search today?" Alex asked, his voice hoarse. "You need to stay close to home, sweetie," Sarah said, pulling both children into a hug. "The police need to talk to you again, and I need you here." Emma wiped her nose with her sleeve. "I keep thinking about all the places Tommy might have gone. What if he's scared? What if he's hurt?" Detective Sullivan knelt down to the twins' eye level. "We're doing everything we can to find your brother. Can you think of anywhere special Tommy liked to play? Maybe somewhere he mentioned recently?" The twins exchanged glances. "He talked about exploring the old storm tunnels," Emma said hesitantly. "But Mom always said they were dangerous." Sarah's face went pale. "The storm drains, he wouldn't—" "We'll check every tunnel in the area," Detective Sullivan assured her. "Did he mention anything else? Anyone new he'd been talking to?" Alex frowned in concentration. "There was this man at the park last week. Tommy said he was asking about our family, but Tommy thought he was just being friendly." What did this man look like? Detective Sullivan's pen was poised. Tommy said he was tall, with dark hair. He knew Tommy's name, which made Tommy feel important. Alex's eyes widened as he realized the implication. "Do you think—" "We'll investigate every possibility," Detective Sullivan said calmly, but Sarah could see the tension in his jaw. Outside, the search teams were preparing to move deeper into the surrounding woods. Marcus Webb stood near the tree line, ostensibly organizing a group of volunteers, but his eyes kept drifting back to the Mitchell house. When he noticed Detective Sullivan watching him through the window, Marcus offered a supportive wave. "I should join the search," Sarah said suddenly, standing up. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand the need to do something, but it's better if you stay here. If Tommy finds a way to contact home, or if someone calls with information, you need to be available." Sarah sank back into her chair, feeling helpless. The waiting was torture, worse than any physical pain she'd ever experienced. Every minute that passed felt like an hour, every hour like a day. At noon, the first false alarm came. A grocery store clerk in nearby Beaverton thought she'd seen a boy matching Tommy's description with an older man. Police rushed to the location, but it turned out to be a father and son from California, visiting family. By afternoon, tips were pouring in from across the Pacific Northwest. Every red hoodie became Tommy. Every brown-haired boy became hope, then heartbreak. Marcus appeared at the back door around 3 p.m., his work boots muddy from the forest search. "No sign of him in the immediate woods," he reported to Sarah and Detective Sullivan, "but we're expanding the search radius tomorrow." "Thank you." "Marcus," Sarah said, genuine gratitude in her voice, "I don't know how to repay your kindness." Marcus's smile was perfectly calibrated, warm but not inappropriate, concerned but not intrusive. "Tommy is like family to me, Sarah. We're going to find him." Detective Sullivan watched the interaction carefully. Marcus Webb's concern seemed genuine, but something nagged at the detective's instincts. In his experience, perpetrators often inserted themselves into investigations, drawn by the need to control the narrative and monitor police progress. As evening approached and the volunteers began to disperse, Marcus lingered in the Mitchell backyard, ostensibly checking areas that might have been missed. But his true purpose was different. He was ensuring that no one had discovered the carefully concealed entrance to his underground network. 40 feet beneath the neighborhood, accessible through a forgotten maintenance tunnel that connected to the old storm system, Tommy Mitchell sat in darkness, wondering if anyone would ever find him. Above ground, his family prepared for another sleepless night, unaware that their trusted neighbor held the key to their nightmare. The third night without Tommy felt different in the Mitchell house. The initial adrenaline of crisis had worn off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made everything feel surreal. Sarah moved through her home like a ghost, unable to focus on anything except the deafening silence where her youngest child's laughter should have been. At 11 p.m., she finally convinced Alex and Emma to try sleeping in their own beds instead of camping out in the living room, where they'd spent the previous 2 nights clutching each other and jumping at every sound. The twins were reluctant to leave her side, but the toll of sleepless nights was showing in their pale faces and hollow eyes. "Leave your doors open," Sarah told them as she tucked Emma under her covers. "And call me if you need anything at all." Alex lingered in his doorway. At 12, he was trying to be the man of the house, but the weight of responsibility was crushing him. "Mom, what if we never find him?" Sarah's throat constricted. It was the question she'd been avoiding, the possibility that lived in her chest like a physical pain. "We will find him, Alex, we have to." But as she said the words, she wondered if she was lying to her son or to herself. Downstairs, Sarah poured herself another cup of coffee she wouldn't drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of missing person flyers bearing Tommy's smiling face. The image seemed to mock her, his gap-toothed grin frozen in time, unaware of the nightmare that was coming. Detective Sullivan had called earlier with an update. They'd searched every storm drain within a 5-mile radius, interviewed dozens of potential witnesses, and followed up on over 200 tips. All dead ends. The investigation was expanding, but with each passing hour, the statistics grew grimmer. At 11:47 p.m., Sarah heard it, a soft sound from the living room, barely audible over the house's normal, settling noises. She held her breath, listening intently. Knock, knock, knock. 3 deliberate raps, muffled and distant. Sarah's heart hammered as she crept toward the living room, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. The sound seemed to be coming from the fireplace, an old brick structure that hadn't been used in years, sealed up after Sarah worried about the safety of the old chimney. Knock, knock, knock. There it was again, definitely coming from inside the chimney. Sarah grabbed her phone with trembling fingers, ready to call 911, when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Alex appeared first, followed closely by Emma, both children's faces pale with fear. "Mom, did you hear that?" Emma whispered. "You heard it too?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. Alex nodded, his young face serious. It sounded like someone knocking from inside the fireplace. The three of them stood frozen in the living room, staring at the sealed fireplace. The October wind howled outside, rattling windows and making the old house creak, but the knocking had been different, deliberate, rhythmic, almost desperate. Knock, knock, knock. Emma grabbed Sarah's arm. "Mom, what if it's Tommy? What if he's trapped somewhere connected to our chimney?" Sarah's mind raced. It was impossible. The chimney was sealed, and there was no way Tommy could have gotten into the system from their house. But what if Emma was right? What if somehow impossibly Tommy was trying to communicate with them? "Stay here," Sarah commanded, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling Detective Sullivan." But before she could dial, the knocking changed. Instead of 3 measured raps, it became frantic, desperate, like someone pounding with their fists against stone. "Knock, knock, 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 knock." Emma started crying. Alex moved protectively in front of his sister, his jaw set with determination despite his fear. Sarah dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "This is Sarah Mitchell at 1247 Oak Street. My son has been missing for 3 days, and we're hearing knocking sounds from inside our sealed fireplace. Please send someone immediately." The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. "Ma'am, are you certain the sounds are coming from the fireplace?" As if summoned by the question, the knocking resumed, loud, insistent, and undeniably coming from behind the brick facade. "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "Someone is in there." Within minutes, the Mitchell house was surrounded by emergency vehicles once again. Detective Sullivan arrived first, followed by the fire department and a team of police officers. Neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the flashing lights and growing crowd. Marcus Webb appeared at Sarah's side as firefighters began examining the sealed fireplace. "What's happening, Sarah?" "I heard the sirens." "We heard knocking," she explained breathlessly, "from inside the chimney. It might be Tommy." Marcus's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression of concern that looked genuine but somehow felt calculated. "Knocking? Are you sure it wasn't just the wind or settling?" "We all heard it," Alex said firmly, looking directly at Marcus. "It was definitely someone knocking." Fire Captain Rodriguez examined the sealed fireplace opening with a flashlight, then looked up the chimney with a specialized camera. "The chimney's been sealed for years," he reported to Detective Sullivan, "but there are some old connecting passages in these vintage homes. It's possible sound could carry from adjacent properties." Detective Sullivan's eyes sharpened. "Adjacent properties?" "These houses were built in the 1950s, Captain Rodriguez explained. Sometimes they shared chimney systems or had connecting basement tunnels for utility access. If someone was in a neighboring basement or tunnel system, sound could carry through the brickwork." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "You mean someone could be in a basement next door, and we'd hear them through our fireplace?" "It's possible. We'll need to check the neighboring properties." Detective Sullivan was already making notes. "Let's start with a systematic search of every basement in the immediate area. And I want building records for this entire block. Blueprints, utility maps, anything that shows underground connections." As the investigation team organized, Marcus volunteered to help coordinate with the neighbors. "I know everyone on this block," he said helpfully. "I can get permission for the searches and explain what's happening." But as Marcus walked toward his own house, ostensibly to gather the neighbors, his mind was racing with very different concerns. The soundproofing in his underground chamber was supposed to be perfect. If Tommy's desperate attempts to signal for help were carrying through the old chimney system, then Marcus had made a critical error in his planning. Deep beneath the neighborhood, in a carefully constructed bunker that connected to forgotten utility tunnels, Tommy Mitchell heard the sirens above ground. He'd been knocking on the stone walls for hours, his small fists bloody and raw, hoping against hope that someone might hear him. The man who had taken him, the man Tommy had trusted, had called Uncle Marcus, had told him that no one was looking for him, that his family thought he had run away. But the sounds of activity above gave Tommy hope. He resumed his knocking with renewed desperation, pounding against the stone wall that separated him from freedom, unaware that his captor was now standing directly above him, calculating how to silence him forever. The game of cat and mouse was entering its most dangerous phase. At 1:30 a.m., Marcus Webb stood in his basement, staring at the concealed entrance to his underground network. The heavy steel door, camouflaged behind a false wall of storage shelves, had been his greatest engineering achievement, and now it might be his downfall. The knocking had stopped 20 minutes ago, after he'd descended into the tunnel and threatened Tommy with consequences too terrible for an 8-year-old to imagine. But the damage was done. The police were now actively searching for basement connections, and it was only a matter of time before they discovered the truth. Marcus had spent 5 years perfecting this system. What had started as a simple basement renovation had evolved into something far more elaborate, a network of connecting tunnels that linked his property to the old city utility system, with carefully constructed chambers where he could keep his special friends without anyone suspecting. Tommy was supposed to be different. Marcus had watched the Mitchell family for years, inserting himself into their lives with calculated precision. He'd become the helpful neighbor, the reliable friend, the surrogate father figure. His plan was to gradually separate Tommy from his family through manipulation and emotional dependency, not through crude abduction. But when Tommy had hidden behind the garden shed during their game, Marcus couldn't resist the opportunity. The boy had been so trusting, so excited when Uncle Marcus had suggested they play a special hiding game in his basement. Tommy had followed willingly, never suspecting that the basement held secrets darker than his worst nightmares. Now, listening to the activity above ground through his surveillance system, Marcus realized he needed to accelerate his timeline. The police were getting too close, asking too many questions. Detective Sullivan's background check would eventually reveal Marcus's sealed juvenile record, incidents from his teenage years that he'd spent decades burying. Marcus climbed the stairs from his basement, his mind working through contingency plans. He needed to maintain his helpful neighbor facade while finding a way to relocate Tommy before the police discovered the tunnel system. The boy had become a liability, but Marcus wasn't ready to dispose of his prize yet. Outside, he could see the activity at the Mitchell house continuing despite the late hour. Detective Sullivan's car was still parked in the driveway, and lights blazed in every window. Perfect. While the police focused on the Mitchell property, Marcus could implement his backup plan. He knocked softly on the Mitchell's back door, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing his most concerned expression. Sarah answered, her face haggard with exhaustion and hope. "Marcus, you shouldn't be up this late. I couldn't sleep knowing you're going through this," he said, handing her the thermos. "I brought coffee for everyone. Any news about the sounds you heard?" Detective Sullivan appeared behind Sarah, his sharp eyes taking in Marcus's appearance. "Mr. Webb, right? The neighbor who's been helping with the search." "That's right. I live next door," Marcus said, extending his hand. "Anything I can do to help find Tommy. That boy means the world to me. Actually, we'll need to search your basement as part of our investigation into the chimney connections," Detective Sullivan said, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. Marcus's smile never wavered. "Of course, Detective. Whatever you need. I have to warn you, though, it's pretty cluttered down there. I've been renovating for years, and it's quite a maze of projects and storage." "That's fine. We'll work around it." "When would you like to do the search?" Marcus asked. "I can clear some space if that would help." "Actually, we'd prefer to see it as it is now. We'll start the basement searches tomorrow morning, beginning with the properties immediately adjacent to the Mitchell house." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "I'll be ready. In fact, let me check with the other neighbors tonight and make sure everyone's prepared for the searches. Mrs. Henderson is elderly and gets confused easily. I should probably explain what's happening so she's not frightened." Detective Sullivan made a mental note of Marcus's eagerness to coordinate with the neighbors. "That's very thoughtful, Mr. Webb." After Marcus left, Detective Sullivan pulled Sarah aside. "Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to be very careful around Mr. Webb." Sarah frowned. "Marcus, why? He's been incredibly supportive. In cases like this, we often find that perpetrators insert themselves into the investigation. They volunteer to help, show excessive concern, try to control information flow. You think Marcus could be involved?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not making accusations, but I want you to be cautious. Don't share details about the investigation with anyone outside law enforcement." Back in his house, Marcus was already implementing his plan. He descended to his basement and began systematically removing evidence of his tunnel construction. Power tools went into storage containers. Construction materials were hastily moved to less obvious locations. Most importantly, he activated the secondary ventilation system that would mask any sounds from the lower chambers. In the tunnel below, Tommy had heard the conversation through the thin walls. Uncle Marcus was talking to the police, pretending to help, but Tommy now understood the horrible truth. The man he'd trusted, The man who'd given him birthday presents and helped with his homework was the monster who had taken him from his family. Tommy's 8-year-old mind struggled to process the betrayal. Uncle Marcus had always been kind, always patient. He'd taught Tommy how to throw a baseball, had fixed his bicycle when the chain broke. How could the same person who'd read him bedtime stories be capable of such evil? But Tommy was learning that adults could lie, could wear masks that hid their true nature. Uncle Marcus was very good at wearing masks. As dawn approached, Marcus made his final preparations. He would allow the police to search his basement, confident that they wouldn't discover the concealed entrance. The false wall was expertly constructed, designed to fool even experienced investigators. And if they did get suspicious, he had backup plans, ways to relocate Tommy through the tunnel system to other hiding spots throughout the neighborhood. What Marcus didn't know was that Detective Sullivan had already run his background check. The sealed juvenile records were being unsealed by court order, revealing a pattern of disturbing behavior that stretched back to Marcus's teenage years. By morning, Detective Sullivan would know about the missing pets, the fire that destroyed a neighbor's shed, and the young girl who'd accused 16-year-old Marcus of inappropriate contact before her family suddenly moved out of town. The helpful neighbor mask was about to slip, and when it did, the true horror of Marcus Webb's obsession with the Mitchell family would finally be revealed. In his underground prison, Tommy pressed his ear to the wall, listening for any sound that might indicate rescue was coming. He'd heard his mother's voice earlier, muffled but unmistakable, and it gave him strength to believe that someone was looking for him. He didn't know that the man who'd stolen him from his family was upstairs right now, planning to make him disappear forever. Detective Sullivan arrived at the Portland Police Bureau at 6 a.m., 2 hours before his shift officially began. The unsealed juvenile records for Marcus Webb lay spread across his desk like pieces of a disturbing puzzle. What he'd discovered in those yellowed files made his blood run cold. At 16, Marcus had been questioned in connection with 3 missing pets in his neighborhood. The animals were never found, but several witnesses reported seeing him in the area where they'd disappeared. A year later, a neighbor's tool shed had burned down under suspicious circumstances. Marcus had been the one to discover the fire and call it in, positioning himself as a hero while investigators suspected arson. Most troubling was the case of 9-year-old Rebecca Chen. She'd accused Marcus of luring her into his family's basement with promises of showing her a secret fort. According to the police report, Rebecca described detailed knowledge of the basement layout that suggested she'd been inside. But before the investigation could proceed, the Chen family had abruptly moved to California, citing Marcus's father's threats and the community's refusal to believe a child's word against a good family. The pattern was clear. Marcus had been perfecting his methods for over 25 years. Detective Sullivan's phone buzzed with a text from the forensics team. Web basement search scheduled for 9 a.m. City engineer will be on site with building records. At 7:30 a.m., Sarah Mitchell sat at her kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had grown cold hours ago. Sleep had been impossible after the previous night's events. Every creak of the house made her jump. Every sound outside sent her heart racing. The knocking from the fireplace had stopped, but the implications haunted her. Alex and Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, both children looking older than their 12 years. The stress of their brother's disappearance had aged them, stealing their childhood innocence and replacing it with a grim understanding of the world's capacity for evil. "Mom, we need to tell you something," Alex said, his voice unusually serious. Sarah looked up, seeing something in her son's expression that made her stomach clench. "What is it?" Emma stepped forward, wringing her hands nervously. "It's about Uncle Marcus. We've been thinking about some things that seemed weird before, but now—" "What kind of things?" Sarah asked. Though part of her already feared the answer, Alex and Emma exchanged glances. "Remember last month when Marcus offered to drive Tommy to his soccer practice?" Emma began. "Tommy came home acting strange afterward. He wouldn't talk about it, but he seemed scared." Sarah's memory sharpened. She recalled Tommy being unusually quiet that evening, clinging to her more than usual. When she'd asked if everything was okay, Tommy had just said that Uncle Marcus had shown him something cool, but had made him promise not to tell anyone. "And there was the time he gave Tommy that special flashlight," Alex continued. "He said it was for secret adventures, and that Tommy shouldn't tell anyone about their special games." The coffee mug slipped from Sarah's hands, shattering on the kitchen floor. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence as the horrible implications sank in. Marcus hadn't just been a helpful neighbor, he'd been grooming Tommy, "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Sarah whispered. "We didn't think it was bad," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "Uncle Marcus was always so nice, and Tommy seemed happy about their special friendship. We thought we were just jealous because Tommy got extra attention." Sarah pulled both children into a fierce hug, her mind racing. She needed to call Detective Sullivan immediately, but first she needed to know everything her children remembered about Marcus's interactions with Tommy. At 8:45 a.m., Marcus Webb stood in his basement, making final preparations for the police search. He'd worked through the night, ensuring that every trace of his construction activities was hidden or explained. The false wall looked exactly like what it was designed to mimic, old storage shelving filled with legitimate household items. But Marcus was nervous. Detective Sullivan's questions the night before had been more pointed than casual, and the way the detective had watched him suggested suspicion. Marcus had spent years perfecting his ability to read people, to understand what they wanted to see and hear. Detective Sullivan was different, experienced, skeptical, not easily manipulated. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m. Marcus opened it to find Detective Sullivan accompanied by two uniformed officers, a woman in work clothes carrying surveying equipment, and a man with a badge identifying him as a city building inspector. "Mr. Webb, thank you for accommodating us on short notice," Detective Sullivan said, his tone professionally neutral. "This is City Engineer Patricia Reeves and Building Inspector Tom Hartley. They'll be examining the structural aspects of your basement while we conduct our search." "Of course," Marcus replied, stepping aside to let them enter. "As I mentioned, it's quite cluttered down there. I've been working on renovations for years." Engineer Reeves studied a set of building plans as they descended into the basement. According to city records, this house was connected to the municipal utility tunnel system until 1987, when the connections were officially sealed. "Did you do any work that might have reopened those connections?" Marcus's pulse quickened, but his expression remained calm. "Not intentionally. I've done some foundation work over the years, waterproofing, that sort of thing. It's possible I unknowingly accessed old utility spaces." Detective Sullivan was already examining the basement layout, comparing it to the building plans. The space was indeed cluttered with renovation materials, power tools, and storage boxes, but something felt off about the organization, too systematic, too deliberately chaotic. "Mr. Webb, you mentioned you're a contractor. What kind of projects do you typically work on?" Detective Sullivan asked, while examining a wall that seemed newer than the others. "Mostly residential renovation, kitchen remodels, bathroom updates, basement finishing. I specialize in older homes. I understand their quirks and challenges." Building Inspector Hartley was tapping walls with a small hammer, listening to the sound they made. When he reached the wall behind the storage shelves, his expression changed slightly. "Detective, could you help me move some of these boxes? I want to examine this wall more closely." Marcus stepped forward quickly. "Let me help with that. Some of those boxes are quite heavy." But Detective Sullivan was already moving boxes, his trained eye cataloguing their contents. Most contained legitimate renovation supplies, but the organization was too perfect, too convenient. It felt staged. "Mr. Webb, this wall sounds different from the others," Inspector Hartley observed. "The construction appears newer and there seems to be an air gap behind it." "That's possible," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. "I did some waterproofing work back there a few years ago. Had to rebuild part of the foundation wall after a water leak." Engineer Reeves consulted her plans again. "According to these records, there should be access to the old utility tunnel right about here." She pointed to the exact location of Marcus's false wall. Detective Sullivan's radio crackled to life. "Detective Sullivan, we have Sarah Mitchell on the line. She says it's urgent, about Marcus Webb." Marcus felt the walls closing in. His carefully constructed world was beginning to collapse, and he could see suspicion growing in Detective Sullivan's eyes. The false wall that had seemed so clever now felt like a trap, with him on the wrong side. "I'll take that call upstairs," Detective Sullivan said. "Continue the examination down here." As the detective climbed the basement stairs, Marcus realized he was running out of time. His backup plans suddenly seemed inadequate. If Tommy had managed to communicate with his family, if the police were getting closer to the truth, then Marcus would need to implement his most desperate contingency. In the tunnel system below, Tommy pressed his ear to the wall, hearing muffled voices and movement above. He couldn't make out words, but the activity gave him hope. Someone was looking for him. Someone was getting close. He began knocking again, softly at first, then with growing desperation as he realized this might be his only chance for rescue. Detective Sullivan climbed the basement stairs, his radio crackling with Sarah Mitchell's urgent voice. Behind him, he could hear Inspector Hartley and Engineer Reeves discussing the suspicious wall construction. Every instinct he'd developed over 20 years of police work was screaming that Marcus Webb was their perpetrator. "Detective Sullivan," Sarah's voice came through clearly now, "my children just told me some disturbing things about Marcus. I think he's been grooming Tommy." Sullivan stepped outside Webb's house for privacy, his eyes scanning the neighborhood. "What kind of things, Mrs. Mitchell? Secret games? Special gifts that Tommy wasn't supposed to tell anyone about? Private time together? My son Alex said Tommy came home scared after Marcus drove him to soccer practice last month, but we just thought he was being dramatic." Sullivan's jaw tightened. The pattern was textbook predator behavior. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need you and your children to stay in your house and lock the doors. Don't let Marcus Webb inside under any circumstances. Do you think Tommy is—" "I think we're very close to finding him," Sullivan said, praying he was right. "Stay by the phone." Back in the basement, Inspector Hartley was running his hands along the wall behind the storage shelves. "Detective, you need to see this. This wall is definitely newer construction, and it's not load-bearing. There's definitely empty space behind it." Engineer Reeves consulted her building plans again. According to city records, this area should connect to the old utility tunnel system. If someone reopened that connection— Marcus Webb stood at the bottom of the stairs, his calm facade beginning to crack. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool basement temperature. "I told you I did some waterproofing work back there. It's probably just a small cavity from the repair work." Detective Sullivan descended the stairs, his hand unconsciously moving closer to his service weapon. Something about Webb's body language had changed. He seemed coiled, ready to spring. "Mr. Webb, I'm going to need you to step back while we examine this wall more closely." "Of course," Marcus said, but he didn't move. His eyes darted between the investigators and the stairs, calculating distances and possibilities. Inspector Hartley pulled out a small electronic device. "This is a thermal imaging camera. If there's empty space behind this wall, it'll show up as a temperature differential." He pointed the device at the wall and studied the display. His expression changed immediately. "Detective, there's definitely a large empty space back there, and there's a heat signature." Sullivan's blood ran cold. Heat signature meant someone alive was behind that wall. "Mr. Webb, I need you to show us how to access the space behind this wall. Now." Marcus took a step backward, his mask finally slipping completely. The helpful neighbor disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing back there." "The thermal imaging shows otherwise," Sullivan said, his voice hardening. "We know someone is behind that wall. Marcus, we know it's Tommy." For a moment the basement was silent except for the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. Then, faintly, they all heard it. The sound of small fists pounding against stone, muffled but unmistakable. Knock, knock, knock. Inspector Hartley's eyes widened. "Jesus Christ! There's someone knocking back there." Marcus made his decision. He lunged toward the stairs, but Detective Sullivan was ready. Years of police training kicked in as Sullivan tackled Marcus to the concrete floor, both men crashing into a stack of storage boxes. "Tom, call for backup," Sullivan shouted to the inspector while wrestling with Marcus. "And get the fire department down here with tools to break through that wall." Marcus fought with desperate strength, but Sullivan had experience and training on his side. Within minutes, Marcus Webb was handcuffed and pressed against the basement wall, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. "Where's the entrance, Marcus?" Sullivan demanded. "How do we get to Tommy?" Marcus said nothing, his jaw clenched in defiance, but Engineer Reeves was already examining the storage shelves, looking for any kind of mechanism or hidden latch. Above ground, the quiet neighborhood erupted into chaos as police cars and fire trucks arrived. Sarah Mitchell stood at her front window, watching the emergency vehicles surround Marcus Webb's house. Her heart hammered with a mixture of hope and terror. Hope that Tommy was alive, terror about what condition he might be in. Alex and Emma flanked their mother, all three of them crying as they watched the scene unfold. "Is Tommy really in there?" Emma whispered. "I think so, sweetheart," Sarah said, unable to take her eyes off the Webb house. "I think Uncle Marcus has been hiding him there this whole time." In the basement, firefighters had arrived with hydraulic tools and sledgehammers. Engineer Reeves had discovered that the storage shelves were mounted on tracks. They could slide aside to reveal the wall behind them. But the wall itself appeared to be reinforced steel behind a thin layer of drywall. "This isn't just a hidden room," one of the firefighters observed. "This is a professionally constructed barrier. Someone spent serious time and money building this." The knocking from behind the wall had become more frantic, as if whoever was inside could hear the rescue efforts and was trying to help guide them to the right location. Detective Sullivan knelt beside Marcus, who sat slumped against the opposite wall. "Marcus, we're going to get through that wall one way or another. You can help us do it safely, or we can break it down." "But if Tommy is hurt because you won't cooperate..." Marcus looked up, and for a moment, Sullivan saw something that might have been genuine emotion in his eyes. "He's not hurt," Marcus said quietly. "I never hurt him. I needed him to understand." "Understand what?" "That I could take care of him better than anyone else. That he belonged with me." The firefighters had positioned their equipment and were preparing to cut through the steel barrier. The sound of power tools filled the basement, drowning out the desperate knocking from behind the wall. 20 minutes later, they broke through. Detective Sullivan was the first person through the opening, his flashlight cutting through the darkness of the space beyond. What he saw made his stomach turn. The hidden area was larger than anyone had expected, a network of tunnels and chambers extending in multiple directions. But directly ahead, in a small room furnished with a bed, a table, and a chemical toilet, sat 8-year-old Tommy Mitchell. The boy was alive, conscious, and sitting upright on the bed. He was thinner than in his school photos, his red hoodie dirty and torn, but his eyes were alert and hopeful. When he saw the flashlight beam, he scrambled toward the opening. "Are you the police?" Tommy asked, his voice hoarse from calling for help. "I've been knocking on the walls. I knew someone would find me." Sullivan holstered his weapon and reached for the boy. "Yes, Tommy, we're the police, and we're here to take you home to your mom." As Sullivan lifted Tommy into his arms, the boy looked back toward the basement where Marcus Webb sat in handcuffs. "Uncle Marcus told me my family didn't want me anymore, but I knew that wasn't true. I knew my mum would keep looking for me." "Your mum never stopped looking," Sullivan assured him. "She's waiting for you right now." But as they emerged from the hidden chamber, Sullivan couldn't shake the feeling that they'd only uncovered the beginning of Marcus Webb's crimes. The tunnel system extended much further than Tommy's prison, and Detective Sullivan had a sinking suspicion that Tommy Mitchell might not be the first child Marcus had kept down here. The moment Sarah Mitchell saw Detective Sullivan emerge from Marcus Webb's house carrying her son, the world seemed to stop. Tommy's red hoodie was dirty and torn, his face thinner than she remembered, but he was alive, conscious, and reaching toward her with desperate arms. "Mom!" Tommy's voice cracked as he called out, and Sarah broke into a run across the street, tears streaming down her face. The reunion happened in the middle of Oak Street, surrounded by police cars, fire trucks, and stunned neighbors. Sarah fell to her knees as Detective Sullivan gently transferred Tommy into her arms, and for a moment, nothing else existed except the feeling of her youngest child safe against her chest. "I knew you'd find me," Tommy whispered into her shoulder. "I knew you wouldn't stop looking." Alex and Emma had followed their mother and now wrapped their arms around both Tommy and Sarah, creating a tight family circle in the chaos of the crime scene. All four of them were crying, tears of relief, joy, and the overwhelming gratitude that comes when a worst-case scenario transforms into answered prayers. "Are you hurt, baby?" Sarah asked, pulling back to examine Tommy's face. Did Marcus hurt you?" Tommy shook his head, though his eyes held shadows that hadn't been there 3 days ago. "He didn't hit me or anything, but he said you didn't want me anymore. He said I had to stay with him now because you gave me away." Sarah's heart broke at the confusion and pain in her son's voice. "That's not true, Tommy. That will never be true. We've been looking for you every second since you disappeared. The whole neighborhood has been looking for you." Detective Sullivan knelt beside the family group. "Tommy, I know this is overwhelming, but we need to get you checked out by the paramedics." "Okay, just to make sure you're healthy." Tommy nodded but didn't let go of his mother's hand as EMT Patricia Gonzalez approached with her medical kit. The examination was gentle but thorough, checking for injuries, dehydration, signs of abuse. Physically, Tommy appeared to be in relatively good condition, though he'd lost several pounds and showed signs of stress and sleep deprivation. "He seems okay physically," EMT Gonzalez reported to Detective Sullivan, "but he should be seen at the hospital for a complete evaluation, and he'll definitely need psychological counseling to process this trauma." As the paramedics worked, Detective Sullivan's attention was drawn back to the Webb house, where FBI agents had arrived to assist with the investigation. What they were finding in Marcus's tunnel system was painting an increasingly disturbing picture. Agent Lisa Park approached Sullivan with a grim expression. "Detective, we need to talk. What we're finding down there, this is much bigger than one kidnapping. Sullivan glanced at the Mitchell family, then back at Agent Park. How much bigger? The tunnel system extends under at least 4 properties. We've found multiple chambers, some that appear to have been used recently, others that look like they've been empty for months or years, and we've found personal items. Sullivan's blood ran cold. What kind of personal items? Children's clothing, toys, jewelry. Some of it appears very old, possibly dating back years or even decades. We're running everything through missing persons databases. But Detective, I think Marcus Webb has been doing this for a very long time. The implications hit Sullivan like a physical blow. How many children had Marcus taken over the years? How many families had never gotten the reunion the Mitchells were experiencing right now? Meanwhile, in the back of a police cruiser, Marcus Webb sat in handcuffs, staring at the scene unfolding in front of him. His carefully constructed life was in ruins, his secret world exposed, but what bothered him most was watching Tommy back in his family's arms. In Marcus's twisted mind, he'd been saving Tommy from a broken home, offering him stability and devotion that a single mother couldn't provide. Even now, facing life in prison, Marcus couldn't understand why no one saw his actions as altruistic. Officer Janet Rodriguez opened the cruiser door and slid into the driver's seat. Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for kidnapping, child endangerment, and unlawful imprisonment. You have the right to remain silent. But Marcus was no longer listening. He was watching Tommy Mitchell laugh at something his sister Emma had said, and the sound of that laughter, free and unafraid, filled Marcus with a rage he struggled to contain. Back at the reunion, Sarah was having her own internal struggle. Relief at Tommy's return was mixed with a crushing guilt over how she'd been deceived. Marcus had been in their lives for 5 years. He'd eaten dinner at their table, helped with homework, been trusted with her children's safety. How had she not seen the monster behind the mask? "Mom, are you okay?" Alex asked, noticing his mother's distant expression. Sarah forced a smile. "I'm perfect now that we're all together. But I need to ask you something, Tommy. When Uncle Marcus took you, did he say anything about other children? Did you see anything that made you think other kids had been where you were?" Tommy's expression grew troubled. "There were other rooms down there. Uncle Marcus said they were for storage, but some of them had beds and toys. And once I heard someone crying, but when I asked about it, Uncle Marcus said it was just the old pipes making noise." Detective Sullivan, who had been listening, exchanged a significant look with Agent Park. "Tommy, this is very important. Do you remember which direction that crying sound came from?" Tommy pointed toward the east side of the neighborhood. "That way, I think. It was really faint, but it sounded like a little kid." Agent Park was already on her radio, coordinating a search of the eastern section of the tunnel system. If there was even a possibility that another child was down there, they needed to move fast. As the investigation expanded around them, the Mitchell family was finally allowed to go home. Sarah carried Tommy, despite his protests that he was too big, unwilling to let him out of her arms for even a moment. Alex and Emma flanked them protectively, all 3 older siblings creating a barrier between Tommy and the outside world. Inside their house, everything looked exactly the same, but it felt different. The sanctuary of their home had been violated by the knowledge that evil had been living next door, watching them, planning. Sarah double-checked every lock, pulled every curtain closed, and turned on every light in the house. "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" "Mom?" Tommy asked as Sarah helped him into clean pajamas. "You can sleep in my room for as long as you want," Sarah replied, meaning every word. But as she tucked Tommy into her bed, with Alex and Emma setting up sleeping bags on the bedroom floor, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal was far from over. The investigation was just beginning, and she had a terrible suspicion that Marcus Webb's arrest would uncover secrets that would shake their entire community. Outside, the FBI was setting up floodlights around the Webb property, preparing for what would likely be an all-night excavation of the tunnel system. Neighbors stood in small groups on their front lawns, whispering among themselves and glancing nervously at their own basements. The helpful neighbor who had lived among them for years was gone, but the fear he'd planted in their community would linger long after his arrest. And somewhere in the darkness below their feet, investigators were searching for evidence of crimes that might stretch back decades, hoping they wouldn't find any more victims, but preparing for the worst. At 3 a.m., FBI agent Lisa Park stood in the deepest section of Marcus Webb's tunnel system, her flashlight illuminating horrors that would haunt her for years to come. The network was vast, more extensive than anything the team had initially imagined. What had started as a search for one missing child had evolved into something far more sinister. "Agent Park," called forensic technician David Chen from a chamber 50 feet to her left. "You need to see this." Park made her way through the narrow tunnel, her footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The construction was professional grade, clearly the work of someone with extensive engineering knowledge. Marcus had spent years building this underground maze, and every detail suggested meticulous planning. The chamber Chen had discovered was different from Tommy's prison. This one was older, the concrete walls showing signs of age and water damage. But what made Park's blood run cold were the items scattered throughout the room. Children's shoes, faded clothing, toys that looked like they belonged to another decade. "Some of this stuff looks like it's from the 1990s, Chen observed, bagging a small pink backpack. "Maybe even earlier." Park knelt beside a collection of items in the corner. A child's bicycle helmet, a stuffed animal so worn its original color was unidentifiable, and a small silver bracelet with the name Jenny engraved on it. "Run this jewelry through missing persons databases going back 25 years. Start with local cases, then expand regionally." Above ground, Detective Sullivan was coordinating with officers who were canvassing the neighborhood, interviewing residents about any children who had gone missing over the past decade. What they were discovering painted a disturbing picture of a community that had been under siege for years without realizing it. Mrs. Eleanor Henderson, the elderly neighbor Marcus had been so concerned about frightening, had lived on Oak Street for 30 years. When Officer Rodriguez asked about missing children, Mrs. Henderson's eyes grew distant with memory. "There was the Peterson boy," she said slowly. "This was maybe 15 years ago. Little Danny Peterson, he was 7 or 8, just vanished one day while riding his bike. Police searched for weeks, but they never found a trace." Officer Rodriguez made notes. "Anyone else?" "The Martinez girl, about 10 years back. And there was that family from 2 streets over, the Johnsons. Their daughter Sarah went missing during a sleepover. She was supposed to walk home the next morning, but she never made it." Mrs. Henderson's voice dropped to a whisper. "People started keeping their children inside after that." The pattern was becoming clear. Children had been disappearing from the area for decades, but because the incidents were spread out over years and often involved families who moved away afterward, no one had connected them to a single predator living in their midst. Back in the tunnels, Agent Park's team had discovered something that made the investigation even more urgent. In the easternmost chamber, the direction Tommy had indicated hearing crying sounds, they found evidence of recent habitation. A small mattress still warm, food containers dated within the last week, and most disturbing of all, fresh scratches on the walls that looked like they'd been made by small fingernails. "Someone was here recently," Park radioed to the surface team. "We need to expand the search immediately. There might be another child." Detective Sullivan received the message while interviewing Marcus Webb in the back of the police cruiser. Marcus had remained silent since his arrest, staring straight ahead with an expression of cold defiance. But when Sullivan mentioned the evidence of another child, something flickered in Marcus's eyes. "Marcus, if there's another child down there, you need to tell us now," Sullivan said. "If someone dies because you won't cooperate, that's murder 1. Marcus finally spoke, his voice eerily calm. "You people don't understand what I was doing. Those children were lost, abandoned, forgotten. I gave them purpose, structure, love. You kidnapped them. I saved them." Marcus's voice grew more animated. "Do you know how many broken homes there are in this neighborhood? How many parents too busy with their own problems to properly care for their children? I provided stability." Sullivan felt sick listening to Marcus's justification, but he pressed on. "Where is the other child, Marcus?" "What other child?" But Marcus's attempt at innocence was betrayed by the slight smile that played at the corners of his mouth. Underground, the search had intensified. Agent Park's team was now using thermal imaging equipment to scan the walls for any additional hidden chambers. The tunnel system was like a maze, with passages branching off in multiple directions, some leading to dead ends, others connecting to utility systems that extended far beyond the Webb property. At 4:30 a.m. they found her. The thermal imaging detected a heat signature behind what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. Unlike Tommy's chamber, this one had no obvious entrance. Marcus had sealed someone inside. "We need the heavy equipment down here now," Park radioed urgently, "and get me a paramedic team. We're going to need medical support the moment we break through." 20 minutes later, hydraulic cutting tools had carved an opening in the concrete barrier. Agent Park was the first one through, and what she saw would be burned into her memory forever. Huddled in the corner of a space barely large enough to stand in, was a girl who appeared to be about 10 years old. She was unconscious but breathing, severely dehydrated and malnourished. Her clothes were tattered, and she showed signs of having been imprisoned for an extended period. "I need medical down here immediately," Park shouted. "We have a critical situation." As paramedics worked to stabilize the girl, Park searched the small chamber for any clues to her identity. In a corner, she found a small purse containing a school ID card for Emma Rodriguez, age 9, from Lincoln Elementary School. The photo was dated 3 months earlier. Park's radio crackled with activity as she called in the discovery. "We have a second victim, alive but critical. Emma Rodriguez, age 9, appears to have been missing for approximately 3 months. Above ground, Detective Sullivan confronted Marcus with this new information. "Emma Rodriguez, Marcus. A 9-year-old girl you've been keeping in a concrete box for 3 months. She's unconscious and might not survive." For the first time since his arrest, Marcus showed genuine emotion, not remorse but anger. "She was difficult," he said coldly. "Wouldn't adapt to the program like the others. Kept trying to escape, kept crying for her parents. I had to isolate her for discipline." Sullivan's hands clenched into fists. He wanted nothing more than to wipe the smug expression off Marcus's face. But he needed information. "How many others, Marcus? How many children have you taken over the years?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then smiled that same cold smile. "You'll find them all eventually. Or maybe you won't. I've been very careful about my record-keeping." As dawn broke over Oak Street, the scope of Marcus Webb's crimes was becoming clear. The FBI had established a command center in the street, with investigators, forensic teams, and victim services coordinators working around the clock. News vans lined the block, and reporters were beginning to piece together the story of a predator who had operated in plain sight for decades. In the Mitchell house, Sarah held Tommy close as they watched the news coverage. Tommy was struggling to process the revelation that he hadn't been Marcus's only victim, that other children had suffered in the same underground prison where he'd spent 3 terrifying days. "Mom," Tommy said quietly, "when I heard that girl crying, why didn't I try harder to help her?" Sarah's heart broke at the guilt in her son's voice. "Because you were just a little boy in a terrible situation, Tommy. You survived, and that's what matters. Now the police can help that other little girl because of what you told them." But even as she comforted her son, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were still only scratching the surface of Marcus Webb's crimes. How many families had lived with the agony of never knowing what happened to their children? How many more victims were still hidden in the tunnels beneath their feet? The investigation was far from over, and the true scope of the monster who had lived next door was only beginning to be revealed. 1 week after Tommy Mitchell's rescue, the Oak Street neighborhood had transformed into something resembling an archaeological dig site. FBI forensic teams worked in 12-hour shifts, carefully excavating and cataloging evidence from Marcus Webb's underground network. What they were discovering had implications that reached far beyond Portland, Oregon. Agent Lisa Park stood in the FBI's temporary command center, studying a wall covered with photographs, missing person reports, and evidence tags. The timeline stretched back over 27 years, beginning with the disappearance of 6-year-old Rebecca Martinez in 1998 and continuing through to Emma Rodriguez just 3 months earlier. 17 confirmed victims, Park announced to the assembled task force, ages ranging from 6 to 12. The oldest cases date back to when Marcus was 19 years old, fresh out of his parents' house and starting his contracting business. Detective Sullivan studied the photographs of smiling children whose faces had once appeared on milk cartons and missing person flyers. "Have we been able to contact all the families?" "Most of them," replied FBI victim advocate Susan Chen. "The Rodriguez family is staying at the hospital with Emma. She's stable, but will need extensive rehabilitation. The Petersons moved to Florida after their son Danny disappeared, but they're flying back for the investigation. The hardest part is the families who gave up hope years ago. Some of them had memorial services, started foundations in their children's names. This is reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal." Sarah Mitchell had been following the news coverage obsessively, unable to look away despite how much each revelation disturbed her. She sat at her kitchen table, the same spot where she'd drunk countless cups of coffee during Tommy's 3-day disappearance, reading the latest newspaper reports, while Tommy played quietly in the living room with Alex and Emma. The headlines were getting more sensational each day. Neighborhood of horrors, the monster next door, decades of terror underground. But what haunted Sarah most were the smaller stories. interviews with other parents who had lived through what she'd experienced, except their stories didn't have happy endings. Margaret Peterson had been interviewed by Channel 8 News, her aged face showing the toll of 15 years without answers about her son Danny. "I kept hoping he'd come home," Mrs. Peterson had said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Every birthday, every Christmas I set a place at the table. Now I know he was so close, just 3 blocks away, and we never knew." Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway, interrupting Sarah's dark thoughts. "Mom, there's a lady on TV talking about the underground place. She says other kids were there before me." Sarah quickly turned off the television and knelt to Tommy's eye level. "Yes, sweetheart, Uncle Marcus hurt other children before you, but you're safe now and the police are helping those other children's families understand what happened. Will Emma be okay? The girl who was crying? The doctors are taking very good care of her. She's getting better every day." But Tommy's next question cut straight to Sarah's deepest fears. "Mom, why didn't anyone know Uncle Marcus was bad? He was nice to everyone." It was the question that haunted the entire neighborhood. How had Marcus Webb operated for decades without being caught? How had a serial predator lived among them, attending block parties, helping with community events, earning the trust of parents and children alike? Dr. Jennifer Hayes, a criminal psychologist consulting on the case, had provided some answers during a press conference. Marcus Webb is what we call a highly organized predator. He spent years building his reputation, establishing himself as a pillar of the community. This gave him access to potential victims and deflected suspicion. His contracting business provided legitimate reasons to be in people's homes, to understand neighborhood layouts, to identify vulnerable families. The investigation had revealed Marcus's meticulous planning. He'd kept detailed records of every family on Oak Street and the surrounding blocks, noting work schedules, family dynamics, and which children seemed most isolated or troubled. He'd specifically targeted single-parent families, children with behavioral issues, or kids who were frequently left unsupervised. FBI agent Park had discovered Marcus's journal hidden behind a false wall in his bedroom. Hundreds of pages documenting his observations, his selection process, and his gradual grooming of potential victims. The entries read like the notes of a scientist studying lab specimens, devoid of emotion or recognition that he was writing about human children. The entry about Tommy was particularly chilling. T. Mitchell shows signs of father hunger, responds well to male attention and authority, mother distracted by work stress and financial concerns, siblings often busy with own activities, optimal target for extraction during outdoor play activities. Detective Sullivan had spent hours reading through Marcus's journals, trying to understand the mind of someone capable of such calculated evil. What disturbed him most was Marcus's genuine belief that he was helping the children he abducted. In his twisted worldview, he was rescuing them from neglectful parents and providing them with structure, discipline, and purpose. The physical evidence told a different story. The underground chambers had been equipped with restraints, soundproofing, and surveillance equipment. Marcus had created a prison designed to break children's spirits and make them compliant. Those who resisted, like Emma Rodriguez, were isolated and punished until they either submitted or... The FBI had found a third chamber, sealed like Emma's but empty except for small bones and decomposed clothing. The forensic team was still working to identify the remains, but the evidence suggested that not all of Marcus's victims had survived their captivity. At Portland General Hospital, 9-year-old Emma Rodriguez was slowly recovering from her 3-month ordeal. Her parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, hadn't left her side since her rescue. Emma could barely speak above a whisper, and she flinched whenever anyone approached her bed too quickly. "She keeps asking about the boy who was crying," Maria Rodriguez told the child psychologist assigned to Emma's case. "She says there was another child somewhere in the tunnels, but we've told her that was Tommy, and he's safe now." Dr. Amanda Foster, the psychologist, made notes on her pad. "Emma may have heard sounds from previous victims. The trauma has likely affected her memory and perception of time. We need to be very careful about how we help her process these experiences." Back on Oak Street, the community was struggling to come to terms with the revelation that they'd been living above a horror that stretched back decades. Property values had plummeted. Families were moving away, unable to bear the knowledge of what had happened beneath their feet. Others were demanding that the city conduct thorough inspections of every basement in the neighborhood. Mrs. Eleanor Henderson, the elderly neighbor who had lived on Oak Street for 30 years, was perhaps the most devastated by the revelations. She'd trusted Marcus completely, often asking him to check on her when she felt unwell, giving him a key to her house for emergencies. "He could have killed me at any time," she told Detective Sullivan during one of their interviews, "but he was always so helpful, so kind. How do you live with knowing you were fooled so completely?" It was a question echoing throughout the community. Parents were second-guessing every interaction they'd had with Marcus, wondering if they'd missed warning signs, if they could have prevented other children from suffering. The investigation was nearing its conclusion, but the emotional aftermath was just beginning. Counseling services had been established for the entire neighborhood. Support groups were meeting in the community center, and slowly, painfully, the residents of Oak Street were trying to rebuild their sense of safety and trust. But for Sarah Mitchell, watching her son struggle with nightmares and anxiety, the healing process felt impossibly long. Tommy was alive, and for that she was grateful beyond words. But the innocence of childhood was gone forever, replaced by the knowledge that monsters could wear friendly faces and evil could hide behind a smile. The investigation had answered the question of what happened to Tommy Mitchell, but it had raised dozens of others about how a predator could operate undetected for so long and whether the community would ever truly feel safe again.